Alrighty, we are now live where me and Sean here are going to talk about. Wow, I just put 2019 in gaming as the title instead of the last decade, but
I mean, whatever works, but I think we're supposed to be talking about the last 10 years in gaming about influential titles, right?
yeah, just in general, just the last decade. I didn't have like a solid set discussion for this.
Okay, well, where would you like to begin in terms of what were some of your standout titles then?
Just fixing this title real quick.
Oh, of course.
There we go. Conveniently, I have a list of my best games of the decade ready to go.
I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I had a list I wrote up earlier, so I could just refer back to that for some of these.
Are you still there?
There we go. See, I kind of like StreamYard, but for some reason it keeps auto-muting me if I'm like off the main page for too long.
Oh, I see. I was like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah, it's a little annoying. But yeah. What I was saying while I was muted, I think this is kind of the year Atelier or decade Atelier started to take off in the States. Like I know it'd been around prior, but we got the Arkham trilogies that started in 2009, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
with Rorona. Yeah, that was the first of the PS3 ones. So we've had like a fun decade of Atelier games. It kind of dropped after Aisha and picked back up by the end of the decade.
Right.
Like, did you play too many of the Atelier titles?
I can't say I have in terms of them. It's ones that I've missed in terms of just my overall gaming experience. So I can't really speak much about them, to be honest with you.
This thing is like one of the more unique franchises that just kind of managed to maintain its popularity through the decade. It's nice to see. It's like it's not really world-ending plots or anything. Just adventuring, crafting.
Interesting.
Just, as I say this out loud, this sounds like a very boring series when I put it like that. You make stuff, and that's the core of the gameplay in all of them. You make things.
Interesting. Maybe I'll pick it up one day to take a look. Maybe not my cup of tea in terms of titles, but I can definitely see the appeal.
Like if you like turn-based RPGs, combat's a lot of fun in some of the games. Atelier Aisha, probably my favorite in the series. Just don't play the other games of the Dusk trilogy. I think I'm the only guy that hated the timed aspect removal, where every action you took basically counted down your timer. Like it took so many searches out in the field, you'll start to like count down the days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a time limit before the actual game is finished.
Okay.
They removed that after Aisha. And it kind of made a lot of aspects to the game become busy work rather than like actual management.
Right.
Because you can just travel far out, get your crap, and just go right back home. And
Similar to
head
what
right back out.
It's one of those situations where similar to like Dead Rising, where they took it out and it just sort of took away some of the uniqueness of the series.
Yeah, like I know a lot of people liked it because they didn't like the time constraint. Well, I did like the time constraint on it because it forced you to have to manage everything.
Right.
It's more when they removed it, all the stuff that was there that you kind of had to keep an eye on, like what you were picking up because of limited inventory space, time taken to travel, and all these other aspects. they don't make sense once you've removed the timed nature of the game, and it all just becomes busy work. So I think they probably should have just cut some of that aspect out if they were going to remove the timed bit.
Yeah,
but it's still an interesting series regardless. It's not really like anything else that's been out this decade. I appreciate that.
That is a good. I mean, it does sort of stand out in a sea of where everything is always trying to copy the next, hit, or be the next Fortnite or be the next Minecraft in terms of everyone wants to follow the leader in terms of that. So seeing something still stay relatively unique is nice to see.
Indeed. Is there any standout series for you running this decade?
In terms of the standout series of the decade, it's interesting because I'm more of the indie guy, so I'm definitely someone who pays attention to more like unique titles that comes out, and not necessarily a series. But surprisingly enough, probably the Danganronpa series is the one that stands out to me the most because it really did sort of fuse back visual novels and sort of I don't want to say the edge, but it brought back a little bit more, I want to say, chaos into it, because a lot of visual novels, at least the ones I saw, the ones that they were getting promoted were, romantic visual novels, or the sort of down to earth, slice of life type of situation. Seeing Danganronpa come in in 2010 and be something of a cult hit, but then continue on a little bit later on with another episode 2 and 3, and still be able to bring surprises and the chaos of, just I don't want to say horrible shit, but horrible shit happening to a bunch of young kids, and still being able to keep that plot, then that's those surprises going. It was nice storytelling from Spike Chunsoft, and it was something that I don't think a lot of people had seen before. Yeah, you also had like parallels with like Zero Escape coming out during those times, but to me, the idea of the sort of, not necessarily a battle royale, but a battle royale in a student setting and in a courtroom like setting was a nice mixture of things like, Phoenix Wright and the battle royale, Japanese movie, and bringing them all together into something that really did feel different from everything else in the field, other than a couple that were relatively different from them. It's not the Saw kind of stuff. It's, Zero Escape has got its own thing going on, and but Monokuma sort of just stands ahead of where I see in terms of, storytelling, in terms of twist, and in terms of reinventing its own formula within a story like mechanic.
Danganronpa's been this series that it looks. Hold on. Are you hearing me right now?
I am.
Huh. Like, the whole thing that shows your voice being seen, it wasn't moving for me a second ago. I thought I went dead.
Oh, that's weird.
But anyway, like, Danganronpa is this series, like, it looks something like I would enjoy the story and characters. I've been meaning to get to it just because I like the visuals. At least the memes I've seen have been pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
Anything I've heard about the story seems interesting. It's just I haven't had time to get to that one.
It's one of those ones where I hear that a lot, and it's one of those people are like, okay, do I really want to put the time investment into it? Because it does take a little bit of time to get into the story, because it is not a simple story. It's not, hero goes off and saves the world. It's here's a bunch of characters, here's some interconnecting loops, and you're going to have to pay attention for a little bit to really enjoy everything. And with that said, it's not like you can be like, oh yeah, after the first couple hours, I can just throw this game away. It's not for me. Not that simple. It's not going to be something that, you can just, throw away and be like, well, I'll come back to it. No, you're either going to go in and have to play the full game, the first one all the way through, and then decide, okay, do I want to continue? Or you're just going to be sitting there going, well, do I really want to go back to it? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. And you'll forget half the shit that you remember or you were playing, because there is a lot of little intricacies and characters and a lot of little details that you would be like, oh, wait a minute, I remember something, but not necessarily entirely everything.
Yeah. I think I'm hoping to get to him this summer when you have like the major game droughts that generally hit during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I might be able to make time for Danganronpa by then.
Well, I mean, I would say that, I don't know if there's going to be a fourth game. I really don't, but it's definitely worth your time in terms of the first three, at least. And I know the third one, people are, there's an opinion about that one, but I think, they did what they needed to do to keep the series going in terms of the sort of gotcha aspect of it. So
one other big game series I think both of us have probably played at some point. Dark Souls came out this decade.
I may be one of the only people who have not played that much Dark Souls. I played a little here, a little there. I played a little with my girlfriend Andrea, but it's just a series that I know I've been wanting to try more of, but I get why people like it. I get why people understand it and its influence over the last decade in terms of everything. I mean, it is a meme now of it's hard as Dark Souls. And while it's being used as, okay, try to relate something that everybody knows and understands right now, it is interesting to see that a game of such detailed combat and such a series that I think isn't necessarily the most accessible ended up being one of the most influential of the last 10 years, because it's just like, well, wait a minute, there's a push for accessibility, there's a push for more mainstream portions in gaming, and here comes this one game from a public or a developer who, they were good. They had Metalcore, they had I'm sorry, not Metalcore, our Armored Core series, and they had games under their belt that were solid, but all of a sudden now From Software is a household name because, well, they created Dark Souls. And it's just interesting to see it sort of act as this out of nowhere hit, but at the same time still doesn't necessarily fit among the hits in the mainstream, which is strange.
Yeah, I'm really trying to think if there was anything this decade that just had more influence than the Souls series, because it's crept up everywhere through gaming.
One series by itself, no, I don't think Dark Souls, but as a series, it's sort of on its own in terms of the influence. Now, when you say Souls-like now, there is the only, it's sort of going hand in hand with roguelikes and roguelikes over the last decade, where they've, sort of burst in popularity, which that could give it a run for its money. But yeah, there has been no series that has been more influential. Now game, that's another whole debate. But yeah, no, the Soul series would probably be the one that says, hey, look, we changed the game over the last 10 years.
Inversely, we have something like The Last of Us, which I like The Last of Us, don't get me wrong. I don't think that had the influence people thought it was going to.
I will admit that I enjoyed it, but when seeing it come up in like best stories of the decade, and I sit there going, Is it a accessible story? Is it yes? Is it a story that others can relate to and has a little bit of a difference with a female protagonist, but a daughter or daughter father pseudo relationship there? Yeah, it's been different. With that said, part of me is just sitting there going, okay, the core of this experience, can't you just point to the first season of the Walking Dead Telltale series and there's a lot of the same influence there? I mean, I get that there are differences in the story, but to call it some of the best storytelling and me just sitting there going, no, I don't think it ranks up there, especially in now recent times with some of the better storytelling mechanics that other games have pushed forward. So I don't get I get that there's going to be hype for The Last of Us 2. I like Ellie as a character, but I don't know. I guess I don't see it myself.
Yeah, I really think that's going to be one of those games people just kind of look back on and go, that was that big? Again, I still like The Last of Us. I enjoyed playing it. I'd recommend giving it a shot, but just temper the expectations a little.
But I mean, in terms of like you say, it's like storytelling of the decade. The Walking Dead season 1 by Telltale still stands out to me as, yeah, their seasons after. No, they had a formula in the season 1 that they tried to refine. It never worked, but it does say a lot to me that once that came out, there was a lot bigger of a push for narrative in games. And in particular, yeah, narrative in games had been done before, but this one indie studio, but this one studio, which had created a lot of story-based experiences beforehand, they just, of all things, they knocked it out of the park with that one, and people started to take notice of narrative, and it pushed forward, oh, hey, let's try to get, more choice in games, more influence from the user in games, even though when you look back on it and you look at the choices that you had to make in that game, maybe 2 or 3 were rather important, really, possibly, but it didn't matter because the story was so solid and the characters were so relatable that you could go along with it. So when I think of the influence in the decade, that does stand out to me. Granted, is it the best game of the decade in storytelling? No, not at all. But it does stand out as that, oh, hey, we sort of sparked a flame that, others took forward and, made their own fires from.
Indeed. Now, on top of things like that, though, like choices making mattering, I've kind of been confused about this for probably over a decade, but there's a lot of games that'll like hype up, like your choices really matter, as if it's somehow a new thing. I think back to Super Nintendo, there was a game called Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen. Did you ever play that one?
Not that one in particular, but I know the Ogre Battle series.
Yeah. Like, I think Ogre Battle was originally a spin-off of the Tactics Ogre.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing with that game. It has probably a more interesting and complex morality type system than any other game I've ever seen. Like, you have your own character, like the commander of your army has an alignment stat, which is just your typical good and evil. There's a charisma stat, which is just your general force of personality, as charisma is, and a reputation meter. Like, and the things that affect this is like, if you're using your army and you're like fighting really weak enemies and just mowing them over with just super powered troops, you start to look like a bully to the population, so your reputation may start to drop.
Mm-hmm.
The units you use to liberate cities affect your reputation. The different actions and way you're conducting yourself in battle will affect your alignment and charisma. For a total of 13 different endings in that game. on the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, then I look at these games today, it's like, your choices matter. Here's one of 2 or 3 choices.
Well,
there's your system.
well, but I think that's part of the mainstream appeal in terms of, I mean, like you said, there's so many choices and things that influence what happened in that. I mean, you could point to things like Fallout 2. You could point to things like, those kind of choices in terms of how you built your character, how you went about playing, but the complexity of all those choices over time, it's going to turn off a certain segment of the market. The fact is that not everybody's coming in wanting that experience. I feel like at the point where we were at in gaming at that point, when Walking Dead, the season 1 came in, it narrowed it down so well in terms of here's the choice, here's the influence it had, and it was a lot more direct. Because even in that same year, I believe, Mass Effect 2 came out. And Mass Effect 2 did have a lot of choices that ended up, making a reasonable choice for that game. Your characters could die if you did certain choices. And yeah, it's definitely a lot less complex, but even that one, yeah, people started to, people point back to Mass Effect 2 being like, hey, this was great. And then Mass Effect 3 came along. And yeah, but I don't know. I think it's the fact that it was able to make it so that everyone could see what it was. Because I mean, there was definitely more complex games, there were definitely more complex stories and more everything like that. And it just took that one for people to be like, oh, wait a minute, this can work. Well, it was working, but it's that game that sort of showed that, yeah, it can work.
I think my issue isn't like the games themselves. It's like, I didn't play The Walking Dead because I'm not much of like the visual novel style game kind of guy. I know it's like a different type of thing, but same general idea as a visual novel. But it's more of the marketing aspect sometimes. I think I really just hated gaming marketing this year or this decade. It's more than before.
Your choices matter, and unfortunately, when you have a feature that is like that, it's going to get over marketed, and it's going to be oh, you could do anything. You can when in essence it's like, no, there's obviously going to be restrictions, but it's a little bit, it's hard because like, how do you sell a game like that in terms of, oh, well, your decisions matter? Well, yeah, your decisions somewhat matter, but if that's the crux of your gameplay experience, I get why you want to draw attention to it, but boy, I like with Mass Effect 3 was the prime example. Like, oh, all your decisions will matter in the end, and then red, green, blue.
I don't think it's fair to bring that one up because that was just a mess.
It was a mess, but like it's sort of that mess was a sort of its own creation in terms of like, you had all these storylines. At some point, you had to bring it back together, because unless if you're going to have 200 different endings, I mean, yeah, you could probably have had more, and you could have had to make a little bit more detail, but sooner or later you had to bring it back, and they brought it back in some of the worst ways. They didn't plan on that. But it is a weird situation we're in terms of like, it's the over marketing of things, the over the hype train of, oh, this will let you do everything, or this game will let you fly around and be this something like Anthem, where everybody was hyped for it, and then, oh, wait a minute, no, it literally crashed upon launch.
All I remember about Anthem is there was hype for it, and then nothing. I don't even know what the game was about.
I remember just the clashing of teeth and people being like, what is this, and why does it exist? And why would you take the Mass Effect creators and make them make Destiny again? And It's a good question, and it's one of those situations where it's like, I get what they were trying to go for, but play to your own strengths. I understand you want to, branch out, but you don't take a team that is great in one area and just throw them into the other area and hope for the best. And that's what it felt like with like things like Anthem.
Isn't that just the story of EA this decade?
The funny thing is that EA has done a lot in terms of screwing up franchises. But with that said, things like Dead Space 2. Dead Space 2 was a great game. EA was a part of that. Now, did EA make decisions that ended up costing a little bit in Dead Space? Yes. Did they make a lot of bad decisions in Dead Space 3? Yes, they did. They forced things on the developer. But part of me wonders, would Dead Space 2 have ever gotten off the ground if it wasn't for EA? Same thing with something like Bayonetta 2. I mean, Bayonetta 2 is a great game. With that said, would it ever gotten off the ground without Nintendo? People argue all day before I got a PC report. It's like, well, Nintendo, brought, closed off a bunch of people from playing the Bayonetta series. No, they brought people to it because it never would have existed without them. So, yeah, Dead Space had a popularity, but I don't know if it was popular enough to get a series without some publishing arm behind it. And EA is one of those unfortunate situations where even when they do good, they then follow it up with bad. They did. Apex Legends was good when it started off with. They were a part of Jedi Fallen Order, the latest Star Wars game.
I was shocked that I keep hearing that's a great game.
And I think it's because the fact that Respawn had an understanding. They got an understanding from Respawn. Let us do our own thing. Respawn stood up to them and said, look, let us do our own thing. And Respawn showed them that, hey, it can work. Even with something like Battlefront 2. Yes, Battlefront 2, horrible on launch. Everybody hated it. Talk to the community now. Everyone, they've got a whole bigger fan base and they listen to things, and DICE has made some changes. Yeah, EA really screwed their launch, but then they got out of the way and all of a sudden things got better. So EA gets in their own way a lot, a hell of a lot. But what people point is EA is the worst thing over the decade. To me, there's no contest who's the worst in the decade, and that was Konami. But EA for me is I don't want to say it's a necessary evil, but EA gets a lot of shit, which it deserves, but it doesn't necessarily get the credit for when things do go right. And yeah, they get in their own way at times, but they also have been influential in, Dead Space would never gotten a 2 without them. And yeah, they've closed a lot of studios. Yeah, they need to be held accountable for that. But I don't know. I see EA screwing up a lot, but I also see them doing things and taking risks that maybe others wouldn't necessarily take.
I think the bad of EA far outweighs the good. I wish they would just be a bit more neutral in their publishing. Stop trying to force things on the developers. You bought this studio because of the popularity of their games. Just back them. Let them do the thing you hired them to do. It's all EA has ever needed to do. But they couldn't. They couldn't just let their devs work.
That's true, but with that said, we're in an age where even something let's think about something like Alien Isolation, for example. Alien Isolation.
Is that the one Gearbox released?
No, that's Aliens Colonial.
Oh, that was Colonial Marine. Okay.
Isolation was a faraway hit in terms of critics and in terms of fans, and in the survival horror genre. It's the one where it was survival horror with an alien. Everyone loved it. It only sold less than 2 million. For the graphics and the amount of effort that put into it for creative assembly, I hate to say it to people, and I hate to tell people, it was not necessarily a success from the aspect of, yeah, it was a great game. Yeah, it sold a bunch of copies. But for the amount of money and effort that had to go into that game, it may have come even. It may have gotten even at that point. And people are like, well, why isn't there a 2? Well, there's not a 2 because, yeah, it was a great game, but that doesn't, in a industry where you have so many titles out on every year now, there's so many ways that you can play. This isn't the age of, back in the NES where, yeah, you had a bunch of games, but you didn't necessarily have the resources to look at, 20 games and see, which one's the best at your fingertips. You have to sort of go for a triple or home run on most of these big releases. So I understand a little bit of EA's like, okay, let us understand what our market is and trying to involve themselves. I think they're doing it in a very poor way. And I think they get, again, like I said, they get in their way a lot. But I get where they're coming from. And I hate to sound like an EA apologist, but the more I've seen in the industry over the last several years, the more I understand EA's tactics, the more I hate what they've done to franchises and things, because I feel like they could have avoided several cases. But like, I feel that in this industry, it's hard, especially at the AAA level, to consistently hit on hit on hit, unless if you're someone who has a reasonable backlog in terms of like, oh, you've got the money that you can, take a hit or two for, several years like Nintendo has. And just, you came out the Wii U, it wasn't that great and successful, but you could take the time to develop, the Switch or the, the Wii, and you'd still be fine, as opposed to most everyone else where it's like, if you have 1 or 2 bad hits in a row, that could be a whole studio going under. And it's a little scary to think about, but this decade has been defined by so many titles not reaching those expectations, or even the ones that did well critically still not being enough to save a bunch of studios that really didn't deserve it.
Yeah, the AAA scene has gotten a bit crazy this past decade.
I mean,
it's the bloated budgets. Like, I think it's inevitable this whole thing's going to crash down for a lot of these AAA publishers, just because these budgets keep growing and those numbers aren't catching up.
And it's also in conjunction with, I mean, I hate to say it, games haven't evolved I'm like, all these new pricing models, it's trying to get back to the fact that, hey, guess what? Games in the 80s and the 90s were $60 too, for the most part. They haven't changed over years. And I get that people think that some games are overpriced. They are. But compared to what you got back then, some of them may deserve a little bit more than $60 in certain cases. And it's a sad situation where, yeah, these bloated you bloated budgets, marketing, all this graphical power. Do you really need to see all the single individual hairs on a character model? But if you don't, then all of a sudden people are in arms. And it's just like, okay, hold on a second. If you really want, an evolution in games, that you got to be a little bit more understanding of, okay, maybe we have to take a step back on graphics. Maybe we have to take a step back and focus on gameplay. But I feel like in the bigger picture, they can't with the modern day audience, especially with the modern day call out culture, where it's like everyone's going to jump on them. everyone's going to jump on, oh, you went backwards. What the hell? What's going on? Situations like Spider-Man Puddlegate, where it's just like, think about how much of a controversy that was for 24 hours, where they have to spend an hour or so explaining, hey, it's a different weather system. There was not a puddle in that situation. We didn't downgrade the graphics, and you have to spend time dealing with that. I don't want to say that expectations need to be lowered, but I think people need to be more understanding about, hey, yeah, it may not look like the most next gen thing, but there's probably a reason for that. It's not like that they necessarily cut budget just because in certain situations. There may be, oh, we need the resources for, better flight mechanics, better, a little bit more performance. So I don't know. I'm taking a very interesting view in terms of, I feel like there's a culpability on both sides here, where there is overblown budgets, overblown decision making on publisher side, but I also think that the amount of wants from an average gamer and the expectations for everything to be perfect on release, oh boy, I just see those expectations soaring so high lately. And there's situations where, yes, things like Warcraft 3 Reforged, burn everything to the ground, because that never should have come out. But when I'm seeing stuff like even with the Jedi Fallen Order, where it's like a rare physics bug, people are up in arms because you're able to accidentally teleport the guy all across the map, and saying that they want a $60 refund, and me just sitting there going, I mean, are we at this point where we're flipping a table just because we've seen one bug that is a very, very rare circumstance that it happened, it sucks, deal with it?
See, I'm in an interesting position on this because I kind of see both sides. Like, I know a while back I wrote an article talking about a return to some old school quality of releases. Now, I wasn't talking about like gameplay or anything like that, but bugs. Like, an example I brought up was Final Fantasy VI back on the Super Nintendo when it came out in the States as 3. Fantastic game, but if you compare that game to any other Super Nintendo release at the time, it was a buggy mess. You could wipe the whole cartridge of all of your saves. You could like revive a guy who was supposed to be permanently dead at 0 HP and be unkillable. Have 255 of items, even though the limit was 99. And there was a long list of ways you could potentially cause this bug. But then I look at some modern AAA releases, and I'm like, if that came out in that state today, it would have been more acceptable than a lot of the games that were coming out. So I'm like, yeah, they are definitely releasing games way too buggy. But on the other hand, things like what you just said, that rare glitch that might teleport somebody, it's like that's not that bad. Can't we have a middle ground?
I mean, understanding that there's severity levels to things. Like, I mean, let's face it, Skyrim is a horrible, buggy mess. But for its horrible, buggy mess, it's also an entertaining, horribly buggy mess that I think that people realize that at a certain point where if you were to fix everything in Skyrim, you'd almost lose some of the charm of it. Where you get a situation where people are still making memes about the opening cutscene, and the like a wagon rotating all of a sudden, but it's the severity of what does this bug actually do? Like, okay, you lost progress for a minute or two, fine, whatever. You lost progress to the point where you can't continue on. Okay, hold on, that's a bit of a big concern. And yeah, in the old days, I think it was almost more acceptable because of the fact that, there is no modern day equivalent of, we can go and patch that. And that they're going to miss that. There's going to be some scenario. You don't make a program that is unbuggable or that's not have some sort of bum. it doesn't happen for the complexity of the programs being put out there. But it's the fact that today, especially, it feels like that threshold of, oh, what's an acceptable bug for it to go to release, that has changed, and I don't think it's changed for the better. Especially with, like, when you look at something like WWE 2K20, where it's just like, oh no, this is not acceptable.
Is that the one where there's like that gif of a guy like doing a clothesline from the top rope and then just speeding straight through like the middle rope on the other side of the ring off screen?
Or go glitching into the ring, and all of a sudden it's now become like, an absolute seizure machine of everything, like where it's just like he's clipping into the ground and it's literally shaking the screen. Or situations like, for a game labeled WWE 2K20, when it turned over to 2020, the game stopped working. Where it's just like, yes, there was a server-side check regarding the date that caused the problem because it had transferred over to 2020, and I believe it was the equivalent of similar to a Y2K thing where it overflowed a certain memory value at that point. It's those kind of bugs where it's like, hey, WWE 2K20 is in your title. Maybe you should have checked that to see if it was playable in that year. And the sad thing is, QA probably saw it. QA probably noted it. And it's like, oh, no, we got to push it out now. We got to push it out.
Yeah, I think there does need to be some reconciliation, like on both the publisher side and the audience side, over what to expect out of a new release. Like, stop bloating the budgets to have to be like top end graphics every time. Like, what was it? Nier Automata, massive hit. From what I gather, it wasn't expected to be like that huge AAA blockbuster. They weren't expecting those numbers from the sales, but it looks great. They didn't need top of the line graphics and budget to make that game look fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're going to go, graphics wise, I'm always going to point to Nintendo. Like, yeah, they don't have the power of a PS4 or power of an Xbox One, but you know what they do? They use their resources wisely, and yeah, they may be more cartoonish. Yeah, they may not be as realistic, but don't tell me that you don't get anything out of a presentation like Xenochronicles 2 or Mario or Zelda, because it still works, and they know how to enhance what is there. And it saddens me to see where it's just like we spend so much time critiquing certain things. Like, yeah, we need to talk about frame rates. Yeah, we need to talk about graphical quality at times, but it's only a part of it. If they're sacrificing those elements to deal with something else, like, try something new or try something different, that's okay. But it's a discussion that needs to be happen, but I don't think it's going to. I think there's such a divide between the industry right now that it will crash before anything else. And I'm not looking forward to that.
See, I almost think just a AAA crash is necessary at this point. But at the same time, I think Ubisoft is going to be the one that, if that does happen, they will survive it. Of all the AAA publishers, I think they're going to be okay.
I mean,
like, I don't say this because of like the high quality of their games. They are just really good at reusing assets and keeping costs down. I think they'll survive the crash.
To me, Ubisoft is probably not the one that would survive, just because I think if a crash is going to happen, there's going to be that revolt of, we want something completely different, or we want massive change. And I don't think Ubisoft's going to be the one that's going to change with that. I don't think change is a lot in Ubisoft's blood in terms of, oh, hey, let's do something completely. No, they stick with a formula. They stick with a formula for a while, and yeah, they'll do this odd thing here and there, but to me, it's always, and I'm sounding like a Nintendo fanboy, but I feel like it's always going to be Nintendo in terms of they have the resources to take a hit, but they're also willing to put their heads on the line for a different model of things, like the Switch, like the Wii, like the Game Boy, where it's just like, hey, we're going to do something different and we'll adapt.
Yeah. Well, of course, Nintendo's still going to be there. Like, I don't hear Nintendo and think publisher. Like, I know they publish.
Right.
But for me, they're the console manufacturer.
Right.
Even though, yeah, they're behind a lot. Mario, Zelda, and all that. But I just don't think of them when I think publisher. But yeah, they're definitely going to survive a crash if it comes. EA's screwed.
Are they?
I think so.
I mean, we sit here. Hold on. Let me just bring this up, just because I know it's going to be something that I'm not going to like. But top selling games of 2019. For all the shit that we've talked about over the years with games like 2K20, NBA 2K20, with its in-game advertising, with its, ridiculous microtransactions, for everything that is been a problem, it was NBA 2K20 still sold the most for games in September of 2019. Madden NFL 20, still one of the top 10 best-selling games of 2019. Unfortunately, EA, with the fact that they've got a stranglehold on those licenses of NFL, NBA, FIFA, they're going to be fine. Now, in several years, when that comes back up for, oh, hey, it's 2024 and the NFL license can go somewhere else, and they approach the NFL and be like, oh, hey, we want another exclusive deal. The question will be, will the NFL go for it, or will they look somewhere else? And that is, I think, there is a concern there, but I don't think EA is going to be the first to fall, nor will they'll be one of the last to fall, if anything, just because they have that safety net. Sadly, they've been rewarded for some of the decisions they've made.
See, I just think overall the ill will is just building up too much for them to survive a crash. Like, I think they're going to be around a while. I don't know if they're going to be the first to go, but if a crash of the AAA industry happens, I don't see them surviving.
I think if a crash happens, it's going to be the more casual games that are going to keep it going, in terms of, those people who may not necessarily but play 20 games a year. They maybe play 4 or 5, and they probably are picking up a Madden. They're probably picking up a GTA 5. They're probably picking up the more really popular experiences as opposed to the mid-level, like, AAA titles. So I don't know. I don't know if I can agree with that. And don't get me wrong, EA is one of the first that should be, put on the chopping block, but I just don't see their distribution of sales being, one that will get people. I see more so the fact, like you say, Ubisoft. I see, like, if there's a crash happening, I don't see people buying Ghost Recon Breakpoint. I don't see people buying Siege. I see them as they're the next step on the ladder titles, and they're still great AAA games, but I don't see people going to bat for, oh, we need to increase the price to $100. Nah, I'll just go pick up Madden, or I'll just go pick up GTA 5. Maybe Assassin's Creed, maybe, but even then, I don't know. And so to me, it'll be the beasts of the sales department being the only ones that are going to survive. And sadly, that's some of it's those NBA games and those NFL games.
It's possible. I just think of Ubisoft, it's their ability to keep price or like just their budget so much lower than everybody else in the AAA spectrum that
Yeah,
even if their sales start taking a hit, they're still going to be making money. EA starts taking hits, that might not be the case because just, again, those budgets. So I think that's going to be the deciding factor. But again, who knows?
it'll be interesting to see. Now, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, let's face it. Over the next several years, what's going to be more popular now? The idea of mobile gaming is going to become more popular. It's going to become even bigger elements. Hell, even Nintendo's getting into the whole, gacha system and subscription services even on mobile games, which surprises me. But and going back to what influential games in 2010 or in the 2010s, I hate to say this. I really hate to say this. Clash of Clans were mentioned. It's one of the most popular ones, and Candy Crush Saga, one of the most popular ones. You're gonna see more things like that. It's a matter of how much is it gonna take at this point. I really do hate saying that, but if we're talking influential games and systems over the last several years and the last 2010s, points to the increase in mobile gaming, and in particular the gacha and microtransaction systems there. And who are the ones that developed them? Zynga, Facebook. Oh boy, I'm not looking forward to seeing the next evolution of that. Did we lose him again? Oh, his PC just restarted on him. Okay, well, I guess I am going to have to discuss other things. Okay, by myself. Great. So games over the last 10 years. I think one of the things that I was going to bring up, because I came under the impression it was the most influential games of the 2010s. And I feel like the one game that no one named when you asked that question.
One second. Do you hear me now?
I hear you now.
My PC just restarted right after you mentioned clans, so I missed all of that.
Okay, so I was trying to get back to the idea that, or going back to 2010s and some of the most influential games and some of the most important games of the decade, and me begrudgingly saying, look, Clash of Clans and Candy Crush Saga, they are not the greatest games. They are not, but they are a whole different world in terms of opening up to new markets. And they opened up a whole new market in the mobile section. And regardless of what I think of them, they were important for the decade and may have influenced gaming going forward. And we're going to see more of it. Hell, even Nintendo is getting in on that. That's the one thing that scares me about Nintendo, is that they got in on that, and usually they're the ones who they don't get in unless they think it's going to be like that. Who boy, 2020s are going to be more microtransactions.
I'm not looking forward to that. It's one of those things, like, I love the idea of DLC, but because of big companies and publishers just pushing horrible DLC, including content that sometimes just really should have been in the base game. Just, we can't have nice things because of them. Given it such a bad rap.
It sadly is. I mean, you get a situation where DLC is done right nowadays, and people are still calling for, well, wait a minute, that's way too, why wasn't that, part of the base game? Well, not everything can be part of the base game. There had to be a cutoff at a certain point. It is sad that the DLC and the whole situation around DLC and microtransactions is such a bad line now. It doesn't matter what's fair. It doesn't matter what's not fair. The line itself is toxic. And I don't know what can fix that at this point. I mean, even when you have situations like I see people complaining about like the content of Hollow Knight, and I'm sitting there going, for $20, Hollow Knight on release was amazing.
I loved Hollow Knight.
What?
I love that game.
And well, seeing people complain about the content in that game on the main release, even like 15 or 20 hours, and I'm sitting there going, "Are you joking? Like, is this an April Fool's joke? What the hell are you talking about?" And seeing like, oh, they're just trying to bleed people dry with like the next like DLC and the next expansion, and I'm just sitting there going, what the fuck are you expecting?
Like, that game had so much to do. It was great.
And it was a cheap price. And it got really popular because of that cheap price and for the content it gave. It was the prime example of make a good game, people will buy it. And yet that game of all games is still getting shit thrown at it. Yes, and it's not just that one, negative guy on the internet who's, just throwing everything at everybody. It's a substantial, not a substantial, but a reasonable amount of people that they have to listen to it. Oh boy. I don't know. It's just that DLC right now is literally, you could call it the devil's content at this point, because it doesn't matter if it's good at times. It doesn't matter if it's affordable. It's vile in certain areas because it represents, it's cut content. It's, just more money for the publisher, more money for the, developer. And it doesn't matter, if that's true or not.
I'm going to point to an odd example here of what I think more people should follow in line with. No Man's Sky. Just, yeah, that game was an utter travesty at launch. But eventually what the devs did, just said, nope, screw this. We're going to just stop listening to social media. Let's go out and actually just sit down
and
work on this and fix it. I know DLC is a different topic, but I think they just kind of have to do that.
Yeah.
I know there is a portion of just some audiences that are just loud and not, and they really shouldn't be this asshole-ish at times over every little thing. But you're never going to fix that. Those people will exist everywhere, no matter what. You kind of just have to learn to say, screw it. I ain't pleasing them. Just shut them out and ignore them.
And I hope that, people, start ignoring them more. But with that said, unfortunately, there are the situations where, I point back to Warcraft 3 Reforged, where it's like, how the fuck did you release this? I like even with No Man's Sky, like the signs were there that it was going to be a problem because like lack of trailers, like a gameplay, part of it is on the consumer who, should have realized. They should have done their homework. Okay, fine. But with like something like Warcraft 3 Reforged, where they showed off cutscenes in a freaking game show that all of a sudden is not in the game that was released and was advertised for. Okay, hold on. Now that's what people should be, rioting over. That's what people should be like, wait a minute. Now, yes, burn that down. Yeah. But it just seems like if it's even a slight fault, it's like, okay, get the torches. Get the tables.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's just problems on both sides. Publishers and developers need to learn to filter out the dumb shit better. A lot of consumers need to just take a step back and think about what they're saying sometimes rather than just instantly reacting. It's just kind of a mess. It's always been around. I think it's just worse because, social media. I think it just makes the problems worse all around for these kind of things.
I mean, a prime example of that is, think about how beloved right now Persona 4 Golden is. And it added a little bit more. It did a little bit more to it. Now, think about the reaction to Persona 5 Royale. Yeah, there's been some positive, but there's also been some negative, where it's just like, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. They're adding more content. They're upgrading some stuff. What's the problem here? Oh, they're just making us buy the same game twice. No, wait, hold on a second. They're giving you more content and you don't have to buy it, but people feel like they're not getting the full experience and therefore they're feeling slighted. It is a weird situation where it's like the idea of DLC in that situation, people would be like, oh, just, release the extra stuff as DLC. Well, they've got more content they're doing than just that. They're doing a bunch of fixes. Is it really just that simple? It's such a complicated world now that I just feel like it's not going to be something easy. It's not going to be something that it gets boiled down to a formula, but it feels like everybody's going to boil it down to a formula.
Yeah. You see, this is one of those things, like, I'm kind of surprised at some of the backlash Atlas has gotten for that, just because I look back over their history, their game releases, they've kind of always been shameless whores. I love Atlas, but remakes. I saw some of the stuff that just came out in Japan. There's like all these different shows, live stuff, all these different mobile Persona games, anime adaptations. This has kind of always been their MO.
And it's now new audiences seeing them and them not being understanding of, hey, they've done this before. And are there certain elements of their business that are probably could change for the better? Yeah. But I feel like until until you understand, like, hey, they're trying to make the game better, and it's not because they didn't want to not produce a fantastic game on launch, but they produced a great game on launch. They're adding to it and giving you more story, maybe stuff that had to be cut. And it's not like you have to go and buy that, but I don't know. It's part of the reason why I cover so many indie stuff, because it's just like getting into the AAA and getting into even the AA. It's just like, it feels like a minefield.
Yeah, it can be. Like, when I do, I just try to focus on just the game itself and what you get out of it. Sometimes you kind of have to talk about other things that are unavoidable.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I just try to speak on just the game rather than the weird stuff surrounding it. Now, for the actual decade, what were some of your favorite releases?
I mean, a lot of mine are going to be ones that some people won't have heard of. The one that comes to mind is Valhalla, cyberpunk bartending simulator. Just the storytelling and the amount of influential elements of everything coming together, and the story being so compact and so knit together, and everything influencing the next plot, just did so much for me. And it had an emotional effect on me in terms of helping me with my own struggles. So that one sort of stands out for me. I actually have to make sure that this is within the decade. It is not. World Ends With You was the one I was thinking of, and I'm like, is that 2001? Was that? No, that's 2007.
I did really like that one.
Trying to think here off the top of my head. Thinking.
No,
go ahead.
While you're thinking on that, like when I did do a top 10 of just games released this decade, I was really kind of sad I ended up cutting Fallout New Vegas from my top 10. It's like, it's the best game I think Bethesda's ever published. I love it so much, but it didn't quite cut my top 10.
And I can understand that. I mean, it had its little quirks about it, and I mean, hell, for the amount of time that was put into it in terms of like just the rush that was put on to put it out there after Fallout 3, but yeah, it definitely was up there in terms of the experiences I've had, at least. Granted, I'm not necessarily the biggest Fallout fan, so I sort of it wouldn't made it in anywhere near my top 10, but I get it. I think back on Mass Effect 2, where I feel like the combat was refined enough. I feel like the storytelling was refined enough. The characters were interesting enough, and it seemed to do a lot of things better than the original game, at least in terms of like, okay, yeah, their planets are a little bit more influential. The characters are a little bit more interesting. The story is becoming bigger and bigger. I feel like they refined that formula enough where it's just like, I didn't see a lot where they could go wrong in the third game before it came out. Oh, that was a mistake. But that it's still one that I sit back and go, yeah, this is if this is AAA gaming, then okay, I'm okay with it. I'm all in on if this is what it produces. Actually, even you see, I give a lot of shit for to EA in certain elements, and then the games that come to mind for like some of my favorites of the genre, like Dead Space 2 is one that comes to mind, where they add a little bit more action. It still was doing very well in terms of the gameplay, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I joke about EA in terms of like, okay, yeah, they're probably going to screw something up, but two of the games that they ended up publishing were in my top games of the decade.
Yeah, that's a weird thing that happens sometimes. I don't think any of their games actually made my top 10 for this past decade, though.
No? I know it's going to be one that seems like, okay, in a sea of AAAs, just Binding of Isaac. Just the simplicity of, oh, hey, here's a little kid who throws out tears to kill enemies. Oh, wait, it's addictive as all hell, and you can keep on playing it for 200 hours. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's actually got a storyline and it's refined to a point where it's just like, wait a minute, what am I playing again? This is about the Bible? Hold on a second. I didn't get that the first time around. Oh, okay. Just the layers that game had, and the fact that they keep on adding to it, with Afterbirth and things like that, it's up there for me. Granted, it probably started my horrible addiction into roguelites, which is still a vice to this day, as I played Hades for an hour or two before the stream.
I need to get that game once it's off early access. It looks good.
It is. I will admit that it is probably, I mean, I should know it's Supergiant Games. They produce great stuff, but I'm just like, oh yeah, just another. another game, just another. Oh, I need to get some other shit done. Don't hit the start button. Don't hit the start button. Don't hit the game started. Well, between that and Slay the Spire right now, it's just like, oh crap.
Yeah, I'm looking at my top 10 right now. I think it's not my highest one. Like, this just made it in at number 10, but it kind of made me the happiest to be able to include Octopath Traveler.
Still haven't played that.
Like, I played their first big game. Like, what was it? Studio Tokyo RPG Factory.
Right.
But they did I Am Setsuna. It is a game I wanted to like because it looked amazing. It had all the elements there to make a great, like, old school feeling RPG with its own twists to keep it from just feeling repetitive like a lot of indie RPG throwbacks ended up feeling. But just nothing they did quite hit with I Am Setsuna.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everything was just off the mark. It had Chrono Trigger like dual text, but you got them all so late in the game that most of them just felt like they were there to fill space.
Right.
A story that just didn't quite hit the note in any mark. So then they finally released Octopath Traveler, and it just felt like everything the studio could do and was good at just finally came together. I get that old school Square Enix RPG feel with all of its unique and original aspects to keep it feeling like its own thing. It just makes me happy I can talk about Octopath in this list. So I probably rated it higher than it is objectively good.
But, I mean, to each their own. I mean, it was good. It was a great experience for you, and it will stick with you, and that's part of it. I have a bunch of those on the list. I haven't made my own top games of the 2010s myself, but one that comes to mind in terms of one that may not fall entirely in there in terms of like what people first think of, but one that's, to me, simplicity at its finest but still fun is Rocket League, where it was just like
I've always been meaning to try that.
It just soccer with cars.
Yeah.
This is a simple concept. Why am I still wanting to play it, now and again? Well, it's because the simple concept was done very, very well, and it's soccer with cars. You don't really need a lot more than that. So, I know that it hasn't been given a lot of good publicity recently because Psyonix got acquired by Epic, and then they did a bunch of things that probably doesn't make the game look good on retrospect, but it's still a game that I think defines like some of my favorites of 2010.
Huh. So in the chat has said apparently Octopath was the Bravely Default team and not Tokyo RPG Factory. I swore.
FAQ.
Factory.
You know what? I think he's right.
Huh. Oh. Well, I guess never mind on my praise of Tokyo RPG Factory then for now.
Still a good game though.
Yes. It was still everything I really wanted to see in a Square Enix RPG.
One game also that comes to mind. In a industry that was filled with military shooters up to that point, it was nice to see Doom. It really was. It was nice to see Doom come back and be like, "Hey, yeah, military shoot. No, here, have speed, have some guns, rip and tear, just have fun, please." And it was nice to see that formula get refined. And it's nice to see the formula come back in other games, like even the ones that aren't necessarily copying its formula. Like, seeing things like Dust come out with more of a Quake feel to it. That it's like, oh, hey, remember why these games are good in the first place? Yeah, you don't have to copy everybody else, but you can use the ones from the past and influence your game design in the right ways.
I was never a first-person shooter guy, so I never really got into Doom. But at the same time, I'm happy it's back like this. Like, I want to get Doom Eternal when that comes out, just because I like a lot. It looks like it's a lot more mobile than some of the other Dooms, but you get to play Doom guy and just mass murder demons with the whatever weapons he has.
And it's nice to see that the storytelling is still there. It's just that, oh, hey, you can do a lot more with, him throwing a monitor across when somebody's talking to him and saying something that he doesn't like, as opposed to, oh, here's a 15-minute backstory about, X, Y, and Z that you probably don't care about because you haven't met them yet. So
yeah, it's just refreshing to have something like Doom on the game releases in the modern day. Just makes me happy. It was like finding out Wizardry had another game release a couple years ago. I completely missed.
Just like, oh, hey, I remember that.
It's just nice to see some old titans able to just keep some momentum in the modern day, be successful and good. Like, I think probably like when I did my list, the weirdest game I ended up including, I'd probably get some head scratches for, was like at number 4 for my favorite game of the decade, Rune Factory 3.
I've heard a lot of good things about the Rune Factory series, and I don't think I've played 3, but
farming and dungeon crawling and a social life simulator.
I mean, to each their own. I mean, if they refine the formula, it worked, and it worked and refined and worked and refined. And yeah, some people can say it's similar. Okay, I don't know how similar it is to Rune Factory 2. I don't know how similar it is to the original, but they took a formula, they refined it, and if you love it, you love it. I mean, people still say Wonder Song is like, wait, Dragnix, that's one of your favorite games of the last 5 years? Yeah, it is. You sing as a bard to deal with your problems. It's a story-based experience. I get it. It's not necessarily for everybody, but damn it, I love that game, and I love how happy it is, and I love the fact that you have a dedicated dance button that you can dance at any point in the game just to change the context of things. And, oh, hey, yeah, everything is about to die. Wait, why am I doing a jig during it? Just because I feel like it. And it can be just something as stupid as that makes the game that much more memorable, because it makes you feel something at that very moment.
Indeed. No, like, I realize, though, like, my top 2 games of this decade are remakes. I don't know what that says about this decade, but I got Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker.
Okay.
Which is the Shin Megami Tensei strategy RPGs.
Yep.
Is there Devil Survivors? And my number 1 was the Odin Sphere remake.
I can understand that one.
Like, I just love Odin Sphere. I think it's probably the best example of art design trumping graphics pretty much every time. Because even without the remake, just looking on the PS2, I think that game looks better than just about anything else out today.
I definitely can understand that. I definitely can, it had its own style. It used it wisely, and it's a game I really want to. I don't think I ever got around to playing the remastered version, but I played the original, and I really want to get back to playing the remastered version.
I think the changes to the combat overall did improve the gameplay a fair bit. But if you don't like it, the remastered version comes with the original, just with the updated graphics.
Right. So that's nice to see. The thing that is interesting to me is that when I thought of the game that I would put towards the top of my list of games that I absolutely enjoyed and would put in the top 2010s. Like there are games that I would expect on there, like, you know, my Valhalla, my Wonder Song. And then the one that kept on coming up to me, like I kept on putting it down on a list. Like I would write down ones just to see, will I do this video or not? Portal 2. Like I keep on thinking back, like, wait a minute, Portal 2 is on that? No, yeah, Portal 2 was fun. Portal 2 was great, and especially those extra portions of it. Oh, right. Portal 2 was a great game. Why do we keep on forgetting about it?
I think people just keep forgetting about it because they didn't think it was as good as Portal 1.
And I get that, but I Portal 1 was a good experience, but I feel like Portal 2, yeah, they refined the puzzle. I think the extra elements of, oh, hey, these optional puzzles, you know, these, you know, the community made stuff really enhanced things to the next level. Yeah, it didn't have your, you know, great story reveals like you did in 1, but you know what? I enjoyed the gameplay a lot more in 2, and I'll fight people to the end of the time. Like, hey, yeah, people got creative with that stuff, and it was hilarious to see some of the things that people made.
See, my thing, I have never played Portal 1, and I don't think I ever will because I was already sick of all the Portal jokes. I'm pretty sure I know every joke from Portal, having never played the game at this point. Like, I don't think I need to play that right now. Or ever. I don't want to hear about the cake anymore.
But yeah, I this decade was an interesting one.
Let's say I think there is at least one more just big thing hanging over the past decade we should probably talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's David Cage.
David Cage.
I think I tweeted this before, but I think the best way to describe it is I don't know if there's another game director who has like the same mastering control of atmosphere as David Cage. The problem is his games are written by David Cage, who doesn't understand how people work.
David Cage is one of those situations where I sit there and I like Fahrenheit. I loved Fahrenheit. I thought it didn't get a lot of attention that it should have when it came out. Yeah, it was weird, but you know what? I understood it. Then Heavy Rain came out, and I was like, yeah, this is good, but like, what?
See,
why is everybody so like? Why does everybody think this is the greatest thing? Like, and then
I loved Heavy Rain, but at the same time, it just makes me bang my head into the wall. Like the quick time event sex scene. That just sums up everything wrong with David Cage right there. Then there's the scene where you're sawing your hand off. And that was gripping. It was intense. It's the quick time event sex scene.
It is a little bit concerning when the quick time I mean, like when you have a crossover where your game has the same feature on the box as Ride to Hell Retribution, I think you have something wrong. But actually, come to think of it, I don't think they actually Ride to Hell Retribution had quick time. I think that is a unique thing to David Cage games.
Like, nobody makes games like him. Like, I don't want him to go away. I just want him to get out and talk to people before he makes his next game.
Look, David, we appreciate your vision and everything, but you know what? We're here to talk to you. Well, what do we talk about? We're just here to talk to you so you know what people are.
Like, I know Beyond Two Souls, or not Beyond Two Souls, that it applies to that one too, but Detroit gets a lot of shit. It deserves it. But all the same things that are good about David Cage are in that game. Like, despite his inability to be subtle in regards to anything, his Malcolm X character, I think his name was Marcus. I want to say his name was Marcus, but no, Malcolm X in that game. His scenes were fantastic. He had energy, passion. There's like real care and drive behind all of these people. But the game falls into the same problems all of his other games all of his other games have. He just doesn't understand how people talk, how they work, how they act. Like all the bravado, there's no substance to back it up, and it frustrates me. I want to love David Cage, but he won't let me.
In coming from a reviewer who takes enjoyment in odd storytelling and characters who are a little bit off, and I mean, I've played games like Zanki Zero, Last Beginning, games like Danganronpa, games where you look at some of the characters and you're like, this is ridiculous. But even then, they're ridiculous, but they're still people. You could still you've got a crazy inventor who's obsessively or sexually obsessed with everything, and yet you could still see the human in there. And then at times I look at a David Cage game and I'm like, is David Cage an alien? Is this his perception of humanity? Because I feel like that's the case. I feel like it's his concept of what a human is, as opposed to him understanding what a human is because he is human.
Yeah. Just, I think if...
And FAQ brings up a good point that you could actually talk about Kojima that way as well.
I actually think he's probably one of the more overrated game directors out there.
I feel like Kojima is one of those people where I will give him all the credit in the world, in a world and a industry that's all about, we need to, consume, we need to have this market, we have to hit this demographic, we need to have, this kind of character in it. Kojima's just like, I'm going to create a character that is completely out there. And like, the thing is that I see Kojima a little bit differently, because I think a lot of his characters are actually very based on Japanese mythology, and I think people don't realize it. Like characters like Quiet, for example. I look at that character and I'm like, oh, that's the story of the Yuki Onna from Japanese myth. It's just in a very different way. It's interpreted in a different way, as opposed to ice, it's water. Oh, okay, that's a cool adaptation. But with that said, when you have somebody not knowing that, they look at that and like, wait, why is she obsessed with water? Why is she dressed like that? Because is that a problem on the battlefield? Why this? Why that? It's, to me, for Kojima, I feel like he wears his influences on his sleeve and doesn't show anybody it. I think, but with the Cage, I'm like, I don't know if this is influenced by anything. I just think you're crazy.
I think one of my favorite things is back when he was doing like promotion for Beyond Two Souls. He was talking about how like all these games today, they just rely on like car chases, gunfights, explosions. I'm here to bring you something else. And then the very same trailer he showed after that included car chases, gunfights, and explosions. I don't think he's just aware of reality. Like, he doesn't see the same world the rest of us see.
You know what? I'm willing to be along for the ride for certain ones of it. It's just, oh boy, sometimes I wonder. Sometimes I wonder.
Yeah. That said, his next release is still going to be a day one purchase for me, because I have to. I can't not play the new David Cage thing.
It's one of those, I don't know if I'll advertise that I'm going to get that for good day one, but you know what? It will be there.
This has been a weird decade.
It has.
Thinking on it.
It's been a decade that has evolved in certain ways that is scary for things like microtransactions, but we have gotten some evolution in indie stuff. We have gotten some evolution in storytelling and certain gameplay mechanics, but it's just when you look back on it, it's just like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to this certain point where it's just like, if you would have told me a game like The Witcher 3 would have been one of the best games, on the top of a lot of people's list over the last, 5 years, I would have been like, no. Like, Witcher 3 is great and all, but I would have been like, how did that one get up there? Like, I love what it did, but I would think that not many people would, get some of the complexity of, oh, you need to pour this on your sword to get, this certain power. And, the complexity would just drive people away. And yet for some people, it drove them to it. To me, it's been a weird, like, decade where it's just like certain complexities have worked that I would have been like, nah. But like then certain complexities where I would have been like, oh yeah, that's cool. And it's just like completely shits the bed. And I'm just like, I don't get it.
See, I think this decade is showing a lot of people like there are so many markets available now, largely because of the internet, that you never would have been able to reach before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you go back to the previous decade, the idea that visual novels were going to have any kind of like actual presence outside of like weird little fan translations would have been ridiculous. You might get a couple weird ones, like I guess Phoenix Wright kind of classifies as a visual novel. I don't think I'd call it one.
It's
elements.
It's story based enough, and it's like, okay, I get calling a visual novel. Yeah, I get what people are going for.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, yeah, like it's just so weird to think like, oh wait, if you would have told me that visual novels, like if you would have told me something like Doki Doki Literature Club would have been a huge hit over 10 years ago, I'd have been like, I'm sorry, what? Like, it's not like that visual novels didn't exist back then. It's not like, there weren't great visual novels back then, but you would have told me that would have gotten the mainstream appeal that it did when the year it came out. I would have been like, okay, what am I missing? What? There have been games that have been more creepy. There have been games that have been more, weird and like out there, but just because it saw the right audience and got enough people to have its eyes on it, oh, okay, it's a mega hit, even though it is a free game. What?
Yeah, and even like outside of your weird indie stuff, you had Demon's Souls at the tail end of last decade showing you don't have to try to include everybody. You can have that game that's not really that inclusive and still find a large audience. Like, the continued success of the Souls series shows that.
It is a really weird, like, combination of, like, all these things where just, like, you got games that are very rarely inclusive, and then you got games like Dark Souls, which is like, yeah, they've got inclusive elements that I think people overlook, but it's hard. It's gonna stop you at a certain point. It's not gonna be for everyone, but you know what? That's fine. That's okay. It'd be great to make it a little more inclusive, but don't shatter the game's core because of it. But it just like for everything that the industry has moved forward with, it feels like it's just like it's moving forward in so many directions that I can't keep up at this point.
Yeah. See, I just hope more companies just stop trying to just make it every game inclusive to everybody. Like having a few, okay. But the moment you do that, you kind of kill what a game is at times.
I mean, to me, it's the definition of inclusive. Like understanding, like for example, understanding what makes Dark Souls. Like people say, okay, hard combat. Well, no, it's not the hard combat. There's many games with hard combat. It's okay, can you master a series of combinations of blocking, dodging, putting yourself in the right position. For certain people, yeah, that's going to be a problem for them. Can you add an accessibility option that will make it able to do that without sacrificing that original content? And I feel like that's where the argument always falls apart, where it's just like, let's make this game more accessible. Let's make, put an easy mode. I don't think an easy mode necessarily hurts a game, but it could shatter well, wait a minute, what are we testing? Now, could you add a ability for people who maybe, let's say, have arthritis that, maybe they don't necessarily have to do the button combinations that others do? Will that maybe make the game less accessible or more accessible?
Yeah.
But still test what they wanted to test in terms of the game's design? Yeah. I do think that it will be, it's that point where, are you sacrificing the soul of your game to become more accessible? Because at that point, what's your game? If you're sacrificing, if you're making it to a point where no one knows, like, people can get past what you wanted them to experience.
Indeed. It's an interesting balance to try to find, I guess. Like, I think most accessibility issues people bring up, though, is not so much the game itself, but like just people's ability to use a controller at times.
It is a weird situation where it's like there are certain types of accessibility where I feel like, no one's going to argue, don't put color blindness in your game, options in your game. Don't put, the ability to remap a controller because, hey, guess what? That is an accessibility option because some people can't use certain parts of the controller and maybe they need that. But then it starts to bleed over to, well, I don't like this character. And it's just like, can you make it so that I can play as this type of character? Well, hold on. That's not the story that we're wanting to tell. And it's going to change completely everything that is, around the story. But then all of a sudden you get people up in arms like, well, you're not including me. And I feel like, okay, hold on. That accessibility, let's take a step back because I don't think that's accessibility at that point. But it's a weird word to me because it feels like it's all encompassing of everything. Like, I want to be included in this. Well, yeah, but there's certain things that, no, we want to include you, but you got to hit a certain threshold in terms of like what we are looking to serve you.
Yeah.
So
I think I heard someone bring up before, I forget who this was. It's kind of like a fundamental difference between like some Japanese mindsets and Western mindsets. Like, you go into an American restaurant, you can like have them take certain things out of the meal. Like, I want this, but say no tomatoes on my burger or whatever. Yet a lot of restaurants apparently in Japan, when you go into, it's like they won't even serve you like different drinks with certain meals because this is what comes with this meal. It's put this together to be experienced this way.
And each of them have their own strengths. Each of them have their own weaknesses. I'm not going to go into a Japanese restaurant with that description and be like, I want you to serve me this drink and this and expect them to do that. But on the other hand, they have to be understanding that if not many people are coming back, maybe they need to look at that again because I'm sorry, but I don't want onions in my soup.
Indeed. I think the idea over there is you don't just have the one option. Like, if you don't want this, there's a different option. Just, you don't get to fully customize each different thing they hand you. It's interesting to see the different, just mentalities behind just these different games like that. Of course, I don't know if that's actually true or not. The guy who said that might have been talking out of his ass. Who knows? I am certainly no knowledge on Japanese culture.
It sounds right for what I was hearing, though.
I think we pretty much covered all the big stuff of the decade then.
Well, I mean, the only thing that is probably the most influential that we haven't covered is Minecraft.
Minecraft. I can't do it. I love the idea. I love Minecraft as a thing. I love someone recreated the city of Beijing in Minecraft.
But it's just, and it's one of those, it's one of those games where people put a shit ton of time into it. I get it. You build stuff. I get it. It's like The Sims. I get it. I understand it. You do you. I don't think I can. I'm sorry. I don't think I can. But to say that it isn't the gateway to, like, it has been the most influential thing over the last 10 years. Like, even with something like Dark Souls, Minecraft opened a whole new world. In particular, it opened a world where I feel like gaming wasn't necessarily a dirty word anymore in certain cases. Like when you heard a parent talk about gaming and they talk about Minecraft now, it's almost with sort of a pride where it's just like, oh, hey, he created this in Minecraft. Before, even back in, like, the Super NES days, the N64 games, like, yeah, my parents had no problems with gaming and had no problems with, getting me games, but there were certain people who would be like, oh, he plays games. And it's just like, it's almost a negative connotation, even though it had research of, oh no, it provides this and these benefits. To me, Minecraft is the sort of that definition of, hey, we changed the world's perception of things in terms of this game, even though it had been done before. Building games have been done before. SimCity, The Sims, stuff like that. This is the one that turned the corner of, oh, this could be a tool for creativity. This could be a tool to enhance an experience of learning, even though those learning games existed in, reading, like reading games, Math Blaster, stuff like that. To me, that to me is the legacy of Minecraft of, yeah, it's not a game that I enjoy, but I sit there and I look at it and I'm like, yeah, okay, you were probably one of the biggest things that happened with gaming because you changed the discussion.
Yeah. See, I'm just happy a game like that can exist, even if I don't really want to basically just sit there playing Legos, which that's effectively what it is.
Yes.
Really advanced Legos. Like, it's not an insult. It's probably the greatest version of Legos to ever exist.
And FAQ brings up, it brought a whole new. It wasn't the first that brought in gaming creators and YouTube and stuff, but it was one of the big catalysts of, oh, hey, it's a whole new entertainment sector of watching people play on Twitch, watching people play on YouTube. The one that I think broke the mold of that, of the 2010s, was probably Amnesia, was the one that I can think of that broke that mold. But yeah, Minecraft did a whole new world in terms of, oh, the idea of 10 years ago of, I'm going to build my career of playing games and having people watch me play games. You would have been laughed out of the room. You would have been literally thrown out of the room and been like put into an insane asylum. Now, it's still really hard, but it's possible.
Yeah. My
Lost you for a second there.
Yeah, this SteamYard, overall, it's nice and easy to use, but I randomly get muted. I don't know why. What was I saying? Yeah, Minecraft, it was an interesting one. On one hand, it didn't really have the influence on gaming itself others did, though you do see a lot of games like try to incorporate more of that build your own stuff than you did before. That's definitely probably part of it. But at the same time, it did have a huge impact on everything. Like you said, streaming, it changed quite a bit. Perceptions on that altered.
I mean,
biggest games. Actually, I think it was one of the best-selling games of the decade, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, it's hard on that one because it was in the beta, and I don't know if they have all the details of like the sales on that, but it was one of the top downloaded and watched, and yeah, it's up there on most of those lists.
Yeah. All right. Well, unless you got something else we can talk about that happened this past decade.
No, I was gonna say I gotta get going soon.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for checking us out while we were alive. This will be uploaded to BitChute eventually once it actually renders on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
You can check out all of Dragnix's links. I've got his Twitter and YouTube in the description. Feel free to check him out there. All of his video reviews. Got my written reviews linked down there. All right. Enjoy your guys' night.
All right.
And maybe one day we'll be able to do a stream again. Maybe not. Maybe it won't be a gap of a year between this and my next one.
Hopefully.
All right, later.
Later.